I just want to quickly introduce the Inspiring Leadership series. This is the first of the these kind of series that we've done. Welcome to everybody. These are for adult volunteers, senior cadets, or junior cadets. Leadership series is kind of for everyone. The idea behind it is about bringing inspiring leaders from all walks of lives to you guys, just to tell their story and also to share their thoughts on leadership. So our first kind of speaker of the series ticks all those boxes in terms of inspiring others. He is an author, 8 books, and has directed and presented no less than 7 TV programmes for the likes of Channel 4 and Sky TV, to name a few. A passionate photographer, he is also an Army Reserve officer in the ranking major, who has also completed tours of Afghanistan during his regular service. So I'm really excited to introduce Levison Wood.
Thank you very much for having me, and it's a real privilege to have so many cadets join as well. So I look forward to chatting to you and answering any of your questions.
Thanks very much. So I'm really excited to be chatting with you today, Levison. I think we first met back in 2018 at one of the Army leadership sessions in Catterick.
Yeah, that's right.
And I've been pestering you ever since to come and speak to the cadets. I think it was probably just a case of good timing, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I think usually, my day job involves me obviously being away a lot as a professional explorer. So good timing. You've caught me. This is the longest time I think I've ever spent in the country. So your pestering paid off.
Well, exactly. And you're sitting with, I'm right in saying you're sitting with your kind of feet up, literally at the moment. You injured yourself.
I had a bit of an accident a few weeks ago. I managed to break my ankle. So I'm sitting here nursing a broken ankle. So, but if ever there was a time to break a bone, it's probably now.
Well, exactly. It's difficult times at the moment, isn't it? So before we start, I probably just, for anybody that doesn't know Levison's background, I kind of wanted to summarise briefly some of his overland expeditions. So I'm right in saying you've completed some sort of mind-blowing number of activities. So you hitchhiked the Silk Road, is that right?
Yeah. So back in 2004, when I was a young 21, 22-year-old, I hitchhiked all the way from the UK to India. Yeah, that was my first sort of big adventure.
And then what was next then? So 2015, walking the Nile?
So 2013 was my big, my first big break when it came to television. I walked the length of the Nile.
Right.
A year after that, I walked the length of the Himalayas. Then all of Central America, from Mexico to Colombia. As you can tell, I like walking. And then I've done lots of other big expeditions. I've done a circumnavigation of the Arabian Peninsula, places like Syria, Iraq, all around the Middle East. I did an expedition from Russia to Iran. And then 2 summers ago, I walked across Botswana, following a herd of elephants. So all sorts of different things, different environments, different terrains. And like you said before, I've written a number of books about it as well.
I'm not really sure where we start in terms of having a chat about that list of kind of achievements. So how about we go back to the kind of beginning then, and let's talk about a young Levison Wood. So where did you grow up, and what was your life like when you were a youngster?
So I grew up in Stoke-on-Trent. Both of my parents were teachers, and my dad was actually a cadet instructor as well. He'd spent a number of years as an officer in what was then the Territorial Army, basically as a reservist whilst being a teacher. So my parents, both encouraged me to be curious and to take an interest in the world and to want to travel. But we certainly weren't rich, and we didn't get to travel very much as a family. But I think that just really inspired me to want to see the world when I kind of grew up. So from a very young age, I wanted to travel, and I basically did everything, in my power to do that. So I think when I finished school, I did my A-levels, and I wanted to go and do what a lot of youngsters do these days, going away on a gap year. But my dad had sort of stopped my pocket money when I was 16 and said, right, well, if you want to go and do that, you can go and earn it yourself. So I basically got lots of summer jobs, temping jobs. I grew up in, like I said, Stoke-on-Trent, just near to the Staffordshire Moorlands. So my first summer job was actually working at Alton Towers, flipping burgers in McDonald's. So there you go. a fairly humble start to it all, but it was great. Actually, it sort of really taught me the value of hard work and graft, and made me even more determined to go and sort of escape and go off on my travels. So at the age of 18, when I finished school, basically I went off backpacking. I went off traveling to places like South Africa, Southeast Asia. I went all around Thailand, Cambodia, all across India. And I think it was that first journey that I did, and it wasn't, I wasn't doing anything particularly challenging, but I think going off on my own was a really valuable lesson, as a young man, because I learned the value of being independent, looking after myself, and also you learn that the world's actually, despite what you might think about hearing on the news all the time, the world's a pretty good place, and people looked after me. As a traveling on a pretty tight budget, as a student backpacker, you learn to look after your money. You learn to make it go a long way, and actually that was a really useful lesson. So that by the time I got to university, age 19, I kind of already had a bit of life experience. So that was quite a useful thing to do. But something else happened that I remember, because I was already interested in a career in the military. Because my dad was in the TA. My granddad had served in the army as well in the Second World War. So I kind of grown up with all these stories of being in the military. And actually, I didn't join the cadets. I think I was rebelling against my dad a bit, because he was a cadet instructor. So I didn't end up joining the cadets. And that was a bit of a regret of mine. But I did do other things. I did the Duke of Edinburgh's award. I'm sure a lot of cadets are doing that as well. And I did bronze, silver, and gold. And I think that was a really useful thing to do. And doing particularly the residential course, which I ended up doing in Germany, cleaning war graves of all things. And then, of course, the expeditions. You go and even just for a few days, you learn the basics about fieldcraft and camping, and that's where I learned all the skills, from what I do now. Really, is from those early days. So it was those things that really inspired me to want to do what I'm doing now.
So what age were you when you did your kind of Duke of Edinburgh's award then?
So I think I was 14 when I did my bronze, and I did my my first expedition in the Peak District. I can't remember how many. I think it was only 2 nights out or whatever. I did my silver when I was 15, 16, I think, and that was in the Brecon Beacons. And then I did my gold expedition up in the Highlands of Scotland. So it was brilliant. I loved it.
And was that through the school then? Was it, or was that another?
That wasn't through the school. So my school, we didn't have any cadets anyway, and I just went to a normal sort of comprehensive school. There was no cadets, and we didn't have a Duke of Edinburgh sort of award. So me and 3 or 4 of the other children from the school, we kind of set it up ourselves. So it was a brilliant experience. We just went and wrote to the Duke of Edinburgh's award and said we wanted to do it. So they put us in touch with a local leader who was able to facilitate it.
Just to do the assessment. Oh, that's really good. So you're totally right. The cadets is like a big thing in it, and the Duke of Edinburgh is the Colonel in Chief of the Army Cadet Force. So there's a kind of synergy between the two. So when you're doing your kind of cadet training, and the Duke of Edinburgh activity kind of sits alongside it from an age perspective. So when you're doing, we have kind of star badges. So when you're doing your kind of 1-star and 2-star, that's aligned to bronze, and then 3-star kind of aligns to. So they're quite good. So you get kind of double bang for your buck. So we tend to find a lot of cadets do. I did it as well. I did bronze, silver, and gold as well. So they're totally worthwhile. And it's one of those things, I suppose. At a certain age, you can pop it on your CV, and it's probably not really so valuable when you're trying to get a job working in Alton Towers flipping burgers and McDonald's. But what it does do, is it kind of articulates to the person that's conducting the interview that you've got something about you, doesn't it?
I mean, I found it really useful when I eventually did apply, to later jobs, to go into university, particularly joining the army. That was looked on really, really highly. So I'm very glad, that was one thing that I'm very, very glad that I did do.
Mm-hmm. So that was it was something that they recognised then. It's just that you had kind of a bit of extra learning.
Something that they were very, very interested in. In the interview process was what did you learn? What were the leadership skills that you learned, at that age, which came in useful. I remember when I went down to the palace to go and collect my my gold award from Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh himself. That was what he asked me. He said, where did you go on your expedition, and what did you learn from doing that? And then it's funny because I met him a couple of years ago as well, and bumped into him at some fancy event down in London. And he asked me exactly the same question 20 years later.
Did you tell him you'd already answered it?
I did tell him he'd already. I didn't expect him to remember me though.
That would have been amazing if he had. So do you think that was was that maybe the start of it for you then? Because clearly, like as you mentioned, kind of some of the expeditions and stuff you've done, I'm pretty sure walking the length of the Nile would get you a bronze, silver, and a gold badge. But do you think that's where it started?
It all started with those early expeditions, and the people you meet. I remember I mentioned cleaning war graves in Germany as part of my overseas residential project. What was amazing about that as a 16-year-old, me and my mate John, we went off to Germany, and it was like a 2-week sort of course, and we did the sort of the volunteering work for a couple of hours. But what was most important was meeting all these other youngsters from different countries who'd all come together on this course, not for Duke of Edinburgh's award, but they were there through various other schemes in different countries. And I ended up meeting and making friends with 20, 30 people from all across Europe. And I've stayed friends with a lot of those people right up until now. And when I did go off on my own backpacking a couple of years later as an 18-year-old, I was suddenly able to just, email people or, send messages to people in all these different countries around Europe and indeed the world, who I could stay with and looked after me, and we became friends. And so it's the network of people that you make from these sorts of things that really is important in later life, not just the qualifications. It's the people that you meet and the confidence that it gives you to be sociable. I can't hear you there, Chris. I don't know if you're on mute again or.
There must be something going on with this. I keep getting muted. Yeah, sorry. It's a really valuable kind of qualification, and it's and as you say, it's about life skills, isn't it? It kind of teaches people things. Certainly for you, it's become a life skill. So you mentioned then that kind of after leaving school, you kind of travelled and went on a gap year. Now I've read the book Eastern Horizons. Where was that in the time frame?
So when I was 18, I went off and did 6 months just traveling around, meeting people. Like I say, I went to all the different places. Then I went to university. I knew I wanted to join the army at this point, because when I was working at Alton Towers one day, I ended up losing my wallet. And it was quite a funny story because I remember losing my wallet and thinking, I'm never going to see this again. But whoever happened to find my wallet sent it back in the post, with a little note saying, look after your possessions, be a bit more careful with your possessions. And it was signed off by a young lieutenant in the artillery. And I remember thinking, well, that's very kind of him for taking the effort to post my wallet back. And because I'd been thinking about a career in the army, I wrote a letter, a courtesy letter back saying, thank you for returning my wallet. Have you got any hints or tips on how to get into the army? And this young lieutenant, who was probably only in his early 20s at the time, wrote me a 6-page essay back. It was amazing. And it was all these hints and tips on how to get into the army, how to pass the tests. He told me, go away and read the newspapers, learn about current affairs. He told me, go and get fit, go and learn how to read a map and use a compass, all the stuff that, the cadets, you'll learn about. But he signed this letter off with this sentence that I've never forgotten. He said, but above all else, travel. And that really stuck with me because I knew that I wanted to join the army and I was kind of ready for that. But that resonated because I thought, well, if I travel, then at least I'll have a few more stories to tell. So I did. I decided I was going to go away and travel. And after I graduated from university, because I studied history at uni, and it was a subject that it's quite vague, so you can pretty much study any era that you want to, any sort of particular sort of time frame. But the one bit that I studied that I really enjoyed was the history of overland expedition. So I actually studied exploration at university and the history of travel writing, things like Marco Polo and all these great explorers. So I decided when I was 21, when I finished university, that I should really go away and do my own big proper expedition. So that's when I decided I was going to go and hitchhike the length of the Silk Road. So there I was with literally no money whatsoever. It was what I just got left over from my student loan. I thought, I'm going to try and get to India. So I hitchhiked all the way. So I started at Nottingham and went down the A1 road and put my thumb up at the side of the road and got down to Calais, got the ferry, over to France, and then went all the way through Europe. I went through Russia. I went through Turkey, through Afghanistan, Iran, all these places that you sort of hear about on the news. And it was the most amazing experience, and ended up in India about 5 months later. And it was that journey that I kept a diary and I wrote about it, but the book was only published 10 years later. So there's a lesson in there somewhere about perseverance, because I was trying to get this book published, but nobody was interested because everyone was like, well, who are you? Nobody wants to hear about your gap year holidays. So I just kept it. I wrote this book. I kept all my notes. And then 10 years later, after I'd already published sort of 3 or 4 other books, my publisher said, oh, it's a good idea, we'll publish that. So it kind of started humbly. There was no quick fix. It's not like I jumped into being on the TV or writing books. It was just these slow incremental things that I've built up one by one, and of course those early journeys were really where it started, and that was all before I'd even joined the army.
So then you went on. So when you came back, then was that a year? Was that a full year?
More or less. I mean, I spent about 5 or 6 months traveling to India. Then I did some more work. I traveled across Europe, and then I went to Sandhurst.
How did you get back? Did you get a flight back? Did you get a flight back?
I spent my entire budget on the flight home.
Oh, did you? Saved up money in there. Oh, that's good. So you came back then, and you joined. So you joined the army. So you went to Sandhurst.
So I went to Sandhurst. I kind of didn't really know which regiment I wanted to join. I like I say, my dad had been in the TA. He was in what was then the Mercians. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking maybe I'll go for my local regiment, the Staffords. But also because I was interested in history and some of the more, the theory of the military, I was also looking at the intelligence corps as well. So went through Sandhurst. I was kind of like middle third. I was doing reasonably well, but it was actually by taking a few risks that was how I ended up in the paras. Because at Sandhurst, you're encouraged to take up a sport on Wednesday afternoons, and you can pretty much do whatever you want. But for one of the terms that I was there, I decided I was going to try my hand at boxing. Now, I'd never done any boxing before. I'm not exactly a muscle-bound sort of Rambo, but I thought, it's good fitness. I'm gonna give boxing a go, and so I took up boxing, and it wasn't just every Wednesday, as I found out. It was every Wednesday, but it's also every morning before you even start the normal training. You have to wake up at 4:00 in the morning to do an hour of boxing before normal fitness. So this was pretty hardcore. I mean, it was just waking up at that time in the morning, particularly in the winter, was just awful. But you know what? I've never been so fit in my life. And actually, by the end of it, everybody, out of all the people that volunteered to do boxing, of which there was about 40, I think it was the top 10 were chosen to fight, to do an actual boxing match in front of the whole academy. And of course, when you've been training for something that much and that hard, you want to be selected, no matter how sort of terrifying it was. And because I'd turned up every single time, and because I'd shown that commitment, I was selected to fight on the fight night. So yeah, I had to do this boxing match in front of 2,000 people. It was the whole academy, plus all these VIPs. There was generals there watching. They'd invited the local town mayor and politicians. And I thought, the pressure's on. And anyway, I ended up winning my fight, but that's not the point. The point was everyone who'd been selected to fight on the night was invited after to go to the sergeant's mess to go for a drink. And the parachute regiment regimental rep, the representative, came over to me and asked me which regiment I wanted to join. And I said, well, at the moment, I'm thinking either the Staffords or the Intelligence Corps. And he said, no, son, you should be joining the paras.
You're good at boxing.
And I thought,
parachute regiments for you.
I thought I'd never gonna. Well, but I never thought I was going to be good enough for the paras at all. But he said, look, I'll interview you right now. So he interviewed me there and then in the mess. And I'd had a couple of beers at this stage as well, so it wasn't exactly the best time to do an interview. But got through. He invited me the next day. I had to do an essay the next morning at sort of 6 o'clock in the morning, and I got fast tracked and was selected for the paras. So I think the lesson there is that sometimes you when you put yourself out there, when you take a few risks, do things that are outside your comfort zone, you never know where these things might lead. Because I think if I hadn't have, volunteered for the boxing, if I hadn't have got into the paras, then maybe, who knows, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now.
Wow. And that was just a chance situation, was it? I suppose that there's a bit of luck, but there's also, as you kind of alluded to, there's a bit of making your own luck, though, isn't there?
There is, yeah. I think you put yourself in the right place, you make a bit of your own luck, you take a few chances, and it will pay dividends in the end.
So you went on and joined the parachute regiment. So what battalion did you go to? 1, 2?
So I graduated from Sandhurst. I commissioned into the paras back in 2006. Which seems like a lifetime ago now, into the 3rd Battalion. So I was in 3 para.
Right.
And that was a real leadership challenge, I have to say, because 3 para, as I joined the battalion, had literally just got back from their first tour of Afghanistan, which was was pretty punchy tour. So I suddenly, as a young 23-year-old, was suddenly in charge as a platoon commander of 40 Afghanistan veterans who'd all seen. So that was quite a tricky one, because you're faced with all these people who've got lots of experience. They had got lots of combat experience, and there was me as this young bloke just out of Sandhurst with not that much life experience. But it was the fact that I'd done things like my little hitchhiking trip, and the fact that I'd done a bit of boxing that stood me in good stead to have a bit of credibility. Is better than none,
Mm-hmm. And then and when did you deployed to Afghanistan yourself then? When was that?
So that was about 18 months later. So we ended up I took over this new platoon. We went through all the rotation, the cycles of training to get ready to go on another deployment. So in the spring of 2008, that's when I deployed to Afghanistan as a platoon commander. And that was, you train so hard, a bit like the boxing. When you train to do a job, you want to go and put it into practice. So by then, I felt very much ready to go on operations, and it's a huge privilege, as an officer to go and, of course, command men in battle.
Mm-hmm. But of course, that would have been the first time that you'd been in Afghanistan, despite the fact that you had never been there in operations. How was that?
A lot of the blokes were a bit confused about when I told them that I'd already been there on, backpacking a few years before.
That's totally crazy. So did you share that with other people then when you were there? Was it kind of just kept in the
word spread? People, because when I was there the first time round as a backpacker, I'd been staying with Mujahideen and Taliban commanders in their houses. So it was very strange to be back in Afghanistan on the other side the second time round. But so the blokes saying,
I recognize that guy over there.
They all thought that I'd been some sort of spy or something for the CIA, but I got away with it.
That's crazy. So that was you, what, 18 months into your military career then? Did you do multiple kind of tours of Afghanistan when you back a
No,
second time?
I just did the one tour of Afghanistan in the end, because by the time I'd done all the training, I was almost at the end of my tour as a platoon commander anyway. So I spent 5 months in Afghanistan. It was a really good experience. It was pretty tough. We had we got into lots of sort of combat encounters. We were fighting, if not every day, certainly every week. It was quite an interesting job. So it wasn't like a lot of the units would go and be kind of stuck in a forward operating base for 6 months and never see anything more than a couple of square miles and just be on patrol. The job that we were doing was something called Regional Command South. We were basically the rapid reaction force. So we were flying in helicopters and basically doing these missions. And sometimes that was rescue missions. Sometimes that was raids. Sometimes it was, we did one of the biggest air assaults since the end of the Second World War. It was quite incredible. We had something like 10 helicopters, 10 Chinooks, all flying in at once, dropping off the whole battalion to go and basically capture all these Taliban commanders. So it was a quite an impressive thing to be a part of. So to go there, having done all this training, and then to go and do it for real was quite special. And you learn a lot about yourself. You learn a lot about teamwork. You learn a lot about leadership.
Mm-hmm. And then after that, did you leave the army straight away? How long were you in when you came back?
No, so after that, I went up to Catterick as part of the directing staff. So I spent 2 years up in Catterick in North Yorkshire, and that was where I was training recruits. So I was training the new recruits, aged all the way from 17 upwards, really, and that was a whole new challenge.
Well, yeah.
But I use the opportunity there to also learn new skills as well. So that's when I did my first expedition. So military expedition. I was given a few weeks off by my boss, and I took 8 of my soldiers away to Nepal to go and climb a mountain in the Himalayas, and that's where I learned a lot of the practical skills as a mountaineer. And also the leadership skills outside of the sort of military context as well, which I then used in my career later on.
So did you plan that completely, but did you kind of complete all the sort of planning for the expedition, etc.?
Yeah, so that was, I had to go through the whole process of going through the Army Adventure Training scheme and applying for funding, raising the money through getting various grants and things like that, building a team, training for it, and then of course all of the logistics on the ground. So it was quite a big job. The expedition itself was 3 weeks. We climbed a mountain called Mira Peak, which is one of the highest sort of non-technical peaks. You don't need to have oxygen, but you do need to learn how to use an ice axe and use crampons and things like that. And then off we went, and it was an amazing experience going to a country like Nepal, because it's a beautiful country, these amazing mountains, and one that I'd always had this attraction to because I've been backpacking there before. So it was great to go there, as an official army expedition, and go and sort of hone the skills that I'd learned over the previous few years.
Was that when you decided that was it around about that time you'd had enough of the kind of army and you thought this walking everywhere and climbing up mountains is for me?
Well, it was about that time where I realized that I had to make a choice. Do I stay in the army and do this full time, or do I go and follow my passions? And the things that really excited me at that time was the travel, was the expeditions, but also learning new skills like photography, writing, and bringing all these things together. So I thought, why not go and do that? I can still stay in the army as a reservist. So I did. I stayed in the reserves, but it enabled me to do both. So after that, when I left the regular army, I basically just went and did all sorts of stuff. I've never had a real sort of proper job ever since, to be honest, because I ended up setting up a little company as a professional guide and an expedition leader. So I was taking all sorts of people, young people, youngsters. I was taking school kids on expeditions in Africa. I was taking private clients to go and climb mountains. We did horse riding expeditions across the Himalayas, everything you can imagine, and basically did that as a job, really, since leaving the army. So that's how I ended up doing the TV stuff later. It wasn't just because I left the army and then walked straight into a job in TV. It was because I was a professional guide. And while I was taking people on expeditions, what I'd do is then take photographs that I could then sell to the newspapers, or I'd write articles that I could sell to guidebooks. So it was bringing in all these different hobbies and trying to turn them into a career. It was very hard. It was quite tough because photography and travel writing doesn't exactly pay very well. So in between my expeditions, I was pretty much didn't have anywhere to live. So I was just sleeping on mates' floors and roughing it a bit. But actually, that was quite a lot of fun. Having just left the army, I was quite used to sleeping on floors, so it didn't really matter too much. But that really, the lessons that I learned from that period of my life enabled me to then turn it into a career, because if you do something long enough and you become good at it, then the money will follow afterwards. So you can pretty much turn anything into a career as long as you're determined and you persevere. And I think that's some of the biggest lessons that I learned, was just stick at it.
Mm-hmm. So you've got what would you say was your kind of biggest sort of challenge and sort of setting up that kind of setting up? Well, I suppose you said it was your own business, wasn't it? We kind of, it wasn't just you as an individual. I'm assuming there was a number of things that sit around the periphery, but kind of what was the biggest challenge around about doing that, and what skills did you learn, I suppose, as or military skills or skills as a civilian to help you do
well,
that?
for me, having been in the army, I knew nothing about the peripheral skills required. I didn't know anything about business or accountancy or marketing or branding or any of that sort of stuff. So I kind of had to just make it up as I went along. And I think there's something quite useful, I suppose, in being able to, if somebody says, "Can you do something?" Don't automatically say no if you've never done it before. Think about it. If it's something that you're willing to try and give it a go, say yes, and then just go and learn how to do it afterwards. And that was my approach to it. And by adopting that approach, you get all sorts of random offers. And before we knew it, we not only were we organizing expeditions to take people on these trips, but then we suddenly got phone calls from television companies, the BBC, Channel 4, Sky, National Geographic were ringing me up and saying, "Oh, can you take our film crews to these places?" Now, I'd never worked in media before, but when I thought about it, taking a film crew or taking a group of people to go and climb a mountain, it's the same thing. It's just a different group of people. So before we knew it, we were taking all these photographers and quite famous people. I mean, I was basically I ended up looking after David Beckham and his family on a couple of trips. And I ended up looking after George Clooney in Africa, went to go fishing. I mean, it was some of the most random encounters with people, but that was all because I just said, yes, I can do this. I'll give it a go. And so as a result, we got quite a good reputation for doing these sorts of things. And off the back of that, only then, having done that for about 3 years, did I get the opportunity to go and do my first big expedition where I was in front of the camera, which was, of course, walking the Nile.
And that was you, as you say, it was your kind of first one, wasn't it? Well, it was the first kind of big one that you kind of was in front of the camera. Then so how did that come about then? Was that a chance encounter, or was it sort of well planned?
Well, it was like I say, I'd been working with all these different groups, taking people on different trips, and then I got these aspirations to create, my own big journey. But obviously, the hardest bit of anything like that is getting the right backing, getting the funding, getting people to pay for it. Mm-hmm. So, of course, television, when that came along, was a great opportunity because they were willing to fund it. But of course, when you bring in the big backers like that, I said, yeah, I can do this. I can go and walk the length of the Nile. This was a journey that had never been done before. I had no idea how long it was going to take or anything really. But I said, yeah, I can do it. I was confident enough to say yes. Channel 4 ended up backing it, but then of course I had to go and do it. So it ended up taking about 12 months, maybe more, of just planning, preparation, doing the research, basically all the homework that goes into something like that before I even set off. So it wasn't just a case of get a backpack off and off you go. There was loads and loads of really hard work to do before even starting. And then, so when I did actually begin, I felt quite prepared. I still had no idea how long it was going to take, and ended up taking 9 months, because I walked all the way from Rwanda through 6 different countries all the way to Egypt. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done, physically, emotionally. I mean, I ended up sort of getting blisters on blisters. My feet grew by a size and a half because they were so rubbed raw from all that walking. I was walking something like anywhere between 25 and 45 kilometers a day, sort of averaging about 30 miles. It's a long way every day, and doing that day in, day out for 9 months was a real challenge. But it paid off. When I finally finished that trip, I mean, I said I was never going to walk anywhere again when I finished that. But of course, you kind of don't remember the bad bits after you leave it a while. So after a few months, and I kind of I'd written a book, and the TV show had gone out, and it was a big success. I had no idea at that stage what success looked like, other than having finished the trip. But this was the biggest rating show on Channel 4, and it did really, really well. And so, of course, they ended up coming back and saying, right, what's next? So I thought, right, I better ride the wave. And so I came up with another idea, which, as I mentioned before, was walking the Himalayas. And then every year since then, I've come up with a new idea and continued to sort of build on that, on the success of that first expedition. So I suppose the biggest lesson there is take a few risks, take these little baby steps and manageable bite-sized chunks, which eventually will add up to doing these massive, massive things, whatever they might be. It doesn't mean necessarily expeditions, but I think the same principle applies whatever you want to do in life.
Mm-hmm. So all of the expeditions, we could probably talk about these for forever. So I'm just conscious that we're kind of trying to wrap it up by 8 o'clock. So from all of your kind of adventures and stuff, what would you say was your favourite, and what's been the most challenging? We said, I think you mentioned there, the Nile was physically challenging.
Well, the Nile was probably the most physically challenging. But an expedition I did 3 years ago was probably the hardest one to organize. And it was a journey around the Arabian Peninsula. I've always been fascinated by the Middle East, because it's something you see on the news all the time. You associate with it. Yeah, you associate with like war and violence and terrorism and all this stuff. But actually, I wanted to go and see what it was really like. So I wanted to do a journey all the way around the edge of Arabia through Syria, Iraq, the UAE, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, all these different countries, basically traveling by any means. So I was walking, I was going on the backs of camels and donkeys and whatever else, going through lots of war zones. And it was a real challenge to organize, just getting permission to go through some of these countries. Some countries like Yemen, I didn't get permission at all. I had to sort of sneak across the borders dressed up as a local, so there was a bit of naughtiness in some parts, but it was the most rewarding place, because I came back with this renewed sense of hope, because I was looked after. I've never had such hospitality like it. Everywhere I went, people were like, wow, we never get foreigners here. Everyone thinks we're all terrorists. So nobody ever comes. So when you go to places like Lebanon, or to places like Yemen, or places like Iraq, the locals are incredibly friendly, and that was quite reassuring. So that was probably one of the hardest ones I've had to do. In terms of ones that I've really enjoyed, I wouldn't necessarily I've enjoyed them all in their own different ways, but I think the one expedition that I look back on most fondly wasn't the TV ones. It was one I did when I first left the army, and I told you I was organizing these expeditions for groups. One I ended up doing for charity. It was just like a little charity expedition. Me and a bunch of my mates, basically just like a bit of a holiday. We took 2 months off, and me and 5 of my mates, we drove an old Land Cruiser all the way from the UK down to Malawi in Southern Africa to donate the vehicle as an ambulance to a hospital. And it was just an amazing road trip. It was brilliant fun.
So you drove it the whole way?
Drove it the whole way. It took 60 days, so it took 2 months through 27 countries, and it was about 10,000 miles. And it was brilliant. It was just great fun. We were just camping the whole way. And we went through, all of Europe, all the Middle East, and all of Africa.
That's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, it was brilliant.
It's an oddball thing to do, isn't it? So in terms of kind of leadership, then what you've obviously done a lot of different stuff there. So you've kind of talked around about kind of as a youngster during the Duke of Edinburgh, you mentioned kind of leadership. You went to kind of Sandhurst, joined the British Army. You mentioned leadership. I'm sure you've had to kind of display immense leadership in some of your expeditions and the planning round about and stuff. What sort of advice would you give young people, cadets, in terms of kind of some leadership advice?
I think the key thing really in any sort of leadership is leading by example, lead from the front. Be good at what you do. If you're good at what you do, you don't have to be necessarily the best. You don't have to be the fittest. You don't have to be the fastest runner. Just be good at what you do, because if you're good at it, if you're up there at the front when you're running, for example, on doing the fitness, or if you just try really hard and you achieve things, people are far more likely to follow you. You should never ask people to do what you're not willing to do yourself. So I think by setting an example and demonstrating some leadership, that's when you inspire the confidence of other people to follow you. One example I'll give from Afghanistan was we were driving through this wadi, like a dry riverbed in between the mountains, and I was in the second vehicle because that was the commander's vehicle, and the vehicle in front suddenly blew up. It drove over a landmine. The vehicle blew up. Luckily, all the blokes inside were thrown clear of the vehicle. They were all blown over to the sort of the sides of the vehicle, but they were all okay. They all stood up. So I told everyone to stop moving, and managed to rescue them, to get them into another vehicle. And then we knew that we were stuck in a minefield. So what we had to do was try and do a 3-point turn out of the minefield to drive back the way we came. So we put all these blokes back in another vehicle, and as we did the 3-point turn, they ended up in the front vehicle yet again. And as we were driving back out of the minefield, guess what happened?
Oh, they got blown up again. Oh dear.
Got blown up again. The same 3 blokes, poor guys, got blown up again. And guess what? Luckily, by an absolute miracle, they were all absolutely fine. They got blown up. They were all lying outside the vehicle again, sort of thinking, wow, this is really not our day. But it was at that stage then that I really knew that I needed to show a bit of leadership here. So I thought, okay, we don't want to take any more risks. I'm going to personally go and rescue each of the men. Now, because we were in a minefield, the only way to do that, we couldn't get the metal detector up to the front without risking the guy walking through the minefield. So I had to show leadership by getting my bayonet out and basically crawling up to each man individually, stabbing the ground in front of me to check for mines, to bring them in the way we came. And I knew I had to do that because I couldn't ask any of the other guys to go and do it, because I needed to show a good example there, because morale was pretty low, as you can imagine. So it's things like that. Sometimes you've just got to take risks. You've got to be the person to show that leadership, because if you do that, they'll follow you anywhere, and you'll kind of yes, of course it was a risk, and it doesn't have to be that extreme, but just worth thinking about. Whatever you do in life, lead from the front and set a good example.
And I think that sort of, I mean, I suppose the underlying the underlying message for the story though is that can be applied, I suppose, to in any walk of life, can't it? If you're working at McDonald's and there's a tricky customer that needs dealt with, then you can kind of step forward and be the leader, and you can take control of the situation and kind of try and deal with it rather than leaving it to one of your colleagues. So I think that's a really good message. All right, thanks very much for that. So we mentioned right at the very beginning, when I first started this up, about kind of some questions and stuff, and we've been asked quite a few questions by some cadets. The challenge back to the cadets was to kind of submit some questions to ask you. So I'll go through some of them. We did offer up a prize, which was one of your books, which you've kindly volunteered to sign. So I've got the book here. One of the cadets is going to win this book, a signed copy, which would be absolutely fantastic. I've kind of went through all the questions that have sort of came in, and one that really stood out, because first of all it was really well written, I thought, and shows experience well beyond this cadet's years. And I've noticed actually that the cadets, I think the cadet is on, or it was on a minute ago, and it's Cadet Fraser Jorgensen from 5 Platoon Scots Guards.
I can see Fraser right there. Hello, Fraser.
Hiya, Fraser. Hiya, Fraser. Oh, right, you're off mute. I didn't think you could get yourself off mute. But do you want to ask your question yourself then? I've got it here, but I'll let you ask it.
Can you just ask it, please?
All right, I'll ask it. Okay, so the question here was, so Doug Allen, a photographer on Edinburgh's Life series, spoke about his close encounters with wildlife, specifically a life-threatening hug from a walrus. Now, I've never heard that, but it sounds pretty scary, to be fair. Have you had any close calls whilst photographing nature?
Gosh,
where your arm is training?
I've had a few, actually.
Yeah, sorry. So, any close calls when photographing nature where your army training or human instinct has saved you? So, good question, Fraser.
No, really good question, Fraser. Thank you. I've had quite a few close encounters with wildlife. On my last expedition, walking across Botswana with a herd of elephants, I mean, we encountered everything from hippos. I mean, hippos are one of the most dangerous animals in Africa. That, you know, if you get in between a hippo and the water, you're in trouble. I've got chased down by elephants. Lions as well, but I think probably the most terrifying one was when I was walking the Nile. I was in Uganda in a place called Murchison Falls National Park, which has got the highest concentration of crocodiles anywhere in Africa. And because I was walking along the sort of banks of the river, sometimes, you know, you'd be kind of sandwiched in between the river itself and, you know, either open savannas, or in this instance, it was like really thick jungle, and then you've got the river, and then this very narrow beach of kind of sand that I was walking on. So I was walking on this sand, and I looked up ahead and saw this enormous Nile crocodile. And when I say enormous, these things can get to about 5 meters long. So this is massive. Wow. And it was sat there right on the beach, blocking my path. And it was just sunbathing, because crocodiles do that. And I knew that crocodiles have a tendency to sort of, if they get scared, so they'll want to get in the water where they feel safe. But this was crocodile breeding season, and crocodiles will lay their eggs in the jungle, like, you know, in the bushes, a few meters inside. So I thought, okay, well, what I'm gonna have to do is scare the crocodile so that it goes into the water so that I can carry on walking. So I got a bit closer and I started clapping my hands, and, you know, as I thought, the crocodile went in the water. So I thought, fine. I carried on walking, and then I heard this rustling behind me. There was another crocodile that came out of the bushes right behind me. So I thought, right, I'm going to keep walking.
This lunatic clapping his hands.
Exactly. And then guess what happened? As I was going forward, a load more crocodiles all started emerging out of the jungle onto the beach. So I looked back, and they were doing the same. So I was literally surrounded backwards and forwards by about 6 or 7 crocodiles. And that was when I was starting to get a bit scared. But there was nothing to do. I thought, I'm just going to have to run. So I just ran, and I was like jumping over the backs of these crocodiles as they were snapping, just to get out of the way. So that was one of the most terrifying things I've ever done in my life. But luckily, I'm still here to tell the tale.
With your legs intact. That reminds me of the James Bond movie.
It was a bit like that. It was a bit like that. Yeah.
With the guys running over the back of the crocodiles. Good. All right, Fraser. I'll reach out to your adult instructor in your detachment. I'll arrange to get this book sent to you in the post. So, well done. Good question. So, Levison, we've got about 7 or 8 minutes left, actually. So I've got a couple of questions here. Feel free, anyone, if you've got any questions you want to pop into the chat, and hopefully we'll have time to kind of answer a few of them before 8 o'clock. So the next question I'll get asked here, if you could go back and give Levison, a young Levison, one piece of advice, what would it be? Don't lose your wallet.
Yeah, well, or do lose your wallet.
Lose your wallet. Yeah.
I suppose the lesson from that was by writing it's something as simple as writing a nice thank you letter back. You know, a little act of gratitude went a long way, because off the back of that, I got this amazing letter giving me all these hints and tips on how to get into the army. So I think it's just worth remembering that wherever you go in life, I'm not just saying that every single thing hinges on a moment's notice, but by taking a few risks, by paying back these acts of kindness, actually will pay off later in life. So that would be my piece of advice: is you know, don't never forget to sort of pay your debts in that respect.
All right, that's a good answer. Right, the next question was, what are your top 3 tips on leadership for cadets? So,
as I said before, you know, lead from the front, lead by example, persevere. You know, don't give up. And I think that's not just for leadership, but that's with anything in life. Is perseverance, determination, grit. All those things are good traits of a leader, because but by showing determination, you follow through. You don't want to be one of these people that just talks a good game. You've got to really follow through and demonstrate that you see things through. I think that's a really important thing. And then finally, not forgetting that, you know, don't forget the sort of don't forget the people around you. You know, one of the best quotes that I still use, because it was actually my platoon sergeant when I was in 3 para, he said that in order to achieve great things, you need to surround yourself by great people. So surround yourself by a good team, and that's half the battle done. And then make sure that everyone in your team feels included, feels rewarded, motivate people and empower people to do a good job.
Good. I couldn't agree more. Thanks very much. That's really good. I've got another question here. What preparation would you suggest for a cadet aspiring to go to Sandhurst and join the army as a British Army officer?
To be honest, Sandhurst does an amazing job of preparing people, but just by following the instructions. I don't think there's anything I could add to that really, other than what they tell you to do. So yeah, I'm a long time out of Sandhurst now, so I don't want to give bad advice.
But if you were to write a letter to a young 15-year-old that lost his wallet,
I would end it in exactly the same way that my letter was ended. Above all, travel, because you can do as much preparation about reading maps and getting good with the compass as you like, but nothing will beat the feeling of going out, traveling independently, backpacking on your own, get a bit of life experience, because that will stand you in good stead. Whether it's going to join the army or doing anything in life, you'll never regret going off and doing some independent travel. When of course, we're allowed to travel.
Well, exactly.
It feels like the last year has kind of dampened that spirit, but I'm sure that once the world sort of gets back to normal and we can travel, those of you who are, you know, reaching that age where you're thinking about whether it's going to university or whatever, I don't think you can go far wrong if you decide to take a few months and go traveling to see the world. Doesn't matter where you go or with what intent, just go out there and see the world if you get the chance. All
right, thanks. Right, I think we've got time for one more. A really interesting question here, actually, and this is from Cadet Corporal Arthur Webster. So Cadet Corporal Webster.
Yeah.
I looked you up on Wikipedia. Good work. Use Google. I'm a fan of Google, and noticed that you have a US Army medal. How did you get this?
This is quite a funny story, actually. It's totally undeserved. So a few years ago, it was 2013. I was in my reserve unit, and we were out in Central Africa in a place called Burundi, training the local army in hearts and minds. So it was what we call stabilization and influence. So it's basically what we call non-kinetic effect. So it wasn't like the war fighting stuff. It's how to deal with the civilian population. Anyway, we were working alongside some American Special Forces soldiers. And it was all office stuff. It was basically giving PowerPoint presentations to these African soldiers. and we were staying in a lovely hotel. It was all very non-military. Anyway, at the end of this 2-week training package, we thought, yeah, that was a nice little jolly. And what we'd always been taught to do in the army is, if you're ever working with Allied troops, always go armed with, like a regimental plaque. I'm sure you've got one there, Chris. Yeah. You get the sort of so we had a few of these plaques, and they cost like £5 in the NAFI or whatever. So we basically gave one to each of these Americans, the 4 Americans that we were working alongside, just as a way of saying thank you. Anyway, the Americans were so embarrassed that they didn't have anything to give us that they said, "Oh, I'm really sorry, we've got nothing to give you." I said, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's nothing. It's just a plaque." Anyway, 2 months later, we found that we'd all been written up for these medals because the Americans are so embarrassed that they hadn't got us anything. So it was it was totally undeserved, but anyway, I still wear it with pride.
So you got a medal for presenting somebody with a plaque. That's that's amazing. Yeah, what medal was it? What medal was it?
It's called the Army Achievement Medal. So it's what Americans get if you do something above and beyond the call of duty.
Right. There you go. That's amazing. I mean, you authorised to wear it then? Is it?
They went through the proper channels to make sure that we're authorised to wear it as well.
That's great. Oh well, there you go. That's an interesting one. I never heard that before. Good. All right, cool. Well, we're just about out of time, so I'd just like to say thanks very much for giving up your time to come and speak to the cadets. I'm sure we'd appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me on, and thank you to all the cadets, and good luck with your careers and your studies and whatever else you get on with.
All right, super. Right, thanks very much.